One of the things I think I mentioned in my opening introduction of myself a few weeks ago was the fact that I like to run. And I still do. I love to run. It's been a passion of mine for 4 or 5 years now. Find it a good way to stay in shape and keep my energy up a little bit. I had about a year ago, though, I had my first serious injury from running. And it was, went out for a run, everything was fine, felt really good. I'd just run the mini marathon in Indianapolis, and went for a run, and I came back and was sitting in my chair and reading. And when I stood up, my knee was just searing pain in my right knee, and never had anything like that happen before. So like any guy, I refused to go to the doctor, and just decided to wait it out. And so I waited 3 or 4 weeks, and then it started to feel okay again. So then I went for a run, and it hurt just as bad as soon as the run was done again. So I started going to doctors and different sports people, and went to a knee specialist, had an MRI, had an X-ray, all these things, and nothing was working. And I went through the same thing. I wait about 4 or 5 weeks, and then try and run again, and it wouldn't work. My knee would still hurt. And it was really discouraging, because I had really come to like running, and didn't really have anything else that I could do, to kind of stay in shape. If you ride your bike, it takes you like 9 hours of riding your bike to get the equivalent exercise of running. So, I didn't have anything, and I was starting to kind of get discouraged a little bit. And I went to a friend of mine, a sports specialist that I had worked with in the past. And he said, you know what you need to do? You need to go to this running clinic. He said, I think this will be really good for you. They'll have some ideas for you. So I went to this clinic, and they said that the #1 cause of injury for people with running is what they call overstriding. And that is like where your steps, your strides are too long. You're landing on your heel, and your foot's really far out in front of you, and because of that causes a lot of damage to your legs. And they said what you need to do is you need to shorten your stride. And in fact, they filmed me running, and they were like, you are the worst overstrider in the history of running. And so they said, you need to shorten your stride. And I said, okay. And they said, there's a real easy thing. They studied it, and they found that if you really want to have the proper stride, you have to take 180 steps per minute. 180 times your foot needs to hit the ground. And if you do that, then you'll be in that proper range. That shortens your stride. So I said, okay, well, how do I do that? And they said, go buy a metronome, like the things that piano teachers use. And so I did. I went into a music store, and I said, I need a metronome. And they said, oh, are you playing an instrument? And I said, no, I'm running. And they were like, okay, well, here you go. So they gave me, this is my metronome. This is my new running partner right here. And you can set it to any speed, but I set it to 180 beats per minute. And I just have to make sure that my foot hits the ground every time there's a beat. And this is what the metronome sounds like. So if you've ever seen me running on the Heritage Trail, or you thought that the insects of the world were going crazy, no, it was just me running, and it freaks people out. You come running by, and then you're beeping 180 beats per minute. And I realize now, like, I'll turn it off when I get close to people so that they don't freak out too bad, and then I turn it back on again. And but anyway, the amazing thing about it is this. The very first time I went running with this thing, and I was instead trying to hit that 180 steps per minute, my knee has been perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. A couple times I forgot it at home or something, and I was like, well, I'll still run, and I'll try and, go faster and do it in my head. But I didn't, and every time I've run without this, my knee hurts when I'm done. And so now you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with anything? Well, I want to make an analogy. In the first reading, Moses says, he's telling all of the people of Israel, here is God's laws. He lays them all out, right? And he says a very interesting line. He says, what great nation has laws like this that are as just as the law that God has given to us. He's looking at this law and he's saying, this is awesome. No other God in the history of gods has done anything like this. Now, I would imagine when someone asks you and they're like, oh, you're Catholic, right? What's the best part about being Catholic? I doubt anyone would say, all the laws. I love being Catholic because there's all these laws and rules and things that the church lays out. And we have a really thick catechism. It's great. I don't think many people say that. Because we live in an era and in a culture which sees any law, anything from the outside that doesn't come from me as being oppressive, as being manipulative. You know, anything that your teacher tells you, anything that your parents tell you, anything that your boss tells you, anything that your church tells you, anything that God tells you, comes from another place besides yourself, and therefore we view it today as being an attempt to control, an attempt to manipulate you. And so we, as a culture, as a society, tend to rebel against the laws that God has given us. And we see them as just the same as if our boss said it, or if we were a teenager and our parents said it. We rebel against them. We have this sort of natural rebellious spirit. And so we don't typically take the same perspective that Moses does in the first reading, where he stands back and says, how awesome is this law? The analogy that I want to make is this. The laws that God gives us in the Old Testament, through Christ, through His church, whatever they are, any law that God has ever given to us is like this metronome. I oftentimes, when I'm running, want to smash this, or throw it in the creek, or whatever. And I could do that. I could say, I don't want to run with this metronome anymore. I want to do it my way. But what happens is, anytime I do that, I don't win. I'm not more free. I'm hurting. I'm in pain. And that's how God's laws are too. We can tell God, I don't want to follow your laws. And we don't have to. God's given us free will. I can go to Mass only on the Sundays I want to. I can get divorced and not worry about an annulment. I can do whatever I want. I can gossip. I can spread rumors about people. I cannot care for the poor. I cannot care for the orphans and the widows. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to follow God's laws. But the thing is, when we don't, it's not like we're not doing God a favor. We're hurting ourselves. And that's the whole reason God gave the laws to us. God gave us laws because He loves us and He knows better than we do what works, what leads to my happiness, what leads to my peace. And when we don't follow those laws, we're not more free, we're miserable. We're in pain. And I see this all the time, especially with the young people that I worked with the last 3 years. What's even more miserable and more painful is when we don't know why we're miserable. Many of the young people that I worked with over the last 3 years would come to me in very serious, distressing situations, because no one talks to a priest when it's not really bad. So the people that would come to me, a lot of the young people, would be in really serious situations. You know, they had committed serious sins. And they were really distressed, truly suffering from anxiety, truly suffering from a kind of a spiritual depression or other, serious issues. And what was so heartbreaking when I would talk with them is they didn't know why they were that way. They had not connected the cause of their misery, which was the sins that they had committed, with the pain. And so when you don't even know a way out of your misery, that's all the more distressing. And I think that's the case for so many people today in our society. They hear the church or they hear God saying, hey, here's a way to live your life if you want to be pain-free. But because it's a law, because it's a rule, we're like, no thanks. Thanks for the advice, but I'm going to do it my way. And so we try even more, and we try harder and harder to do it our way. And it only leads to more pain. And we don't, most people that are out there, and maybe even some of us in here, don't even know the way out of the hole that we've dug because of the way we view God's laws. If we just took Moses' perspective, stood back and said, how awesome are these laws? They're the guide to happiness. They're the guide to peace. We may experience serious suffering in this world. We may lose loved ones. We may lose finances. We may lose a job. We may experience heartbreak or difficulty, divorce, alienation. But what we see is, what we're promised by God is if we keep His laws, we will still find peace. We may experience great difficulty, but if we keep them, we will find peace. Do we believe that? Do we have the perspective of Moses, which is truly in awe and thanks for the laws that God has given? Do we seek to rebel against them? In the second reading, we hear that religion that is undefiled is to care for the orphans and widows and keep oneself unstained by the world. That's a great summary of the laws that God's given us. God's laws encourage us to care for the poor, to care for the vulnerable, the marginalized, the aliens, those who have been mistreated, to care for the vulnerable, and to keep ourselves unstained by the world. Those are the two purposes of God's laws, to help us do that. But if we think that it's control and manipulation, we will never listen and we'll never put them into practice. So may we be people who take the perspective of Moses and are actually thankful for the laws that God has given to us, instead of seeking to rebel against them like children.